Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Nate. I also go by Hockey Boy Nate. Today, we are finally creating a recorded video for once, and so if you guys are excited for that, please be sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe if you're new, turn on notifications, share this with friends and family and on social media. Also, follow me on social media. Link will be in the description down below. We got a jam-packed video here today, all sorts of weather content, specifically tropics. That's the reason why we have the GIF of the tropics here at our disposal. We also have a couple other parts. All timestamps will be in the description, of course, but part 1 will be U.S. severe weather. Part 2 will be a tropical update for both the Pacific and the Atlantic, but because we don't want to forget about our friends over at Hawaii at all. Part 3 will be our earthquake map because we created a live stream for the 8.2 magnitude earthquake up in Alaska, and we got a lot of following off of that, so we're going to want to keep you guys up to date with what all has been happening with the earthquakes. And then part 4 will be YouTube channel updates, so if you guys, just want to come here just to see what's happening with the channel, go to the end of the video and don't watch anything else. Who said that my weather content was good anyways? So let's get in with the video here. U.S. severe weather is up first, and we do have a couple areas to watch out for. 1 out of 5 on the severe weather scale indicated in green. That is our marginal risk. We have that over upstate New York near Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, that general vicinity, as well as northern Pennsylvania. We also have that over here in the deep south from Arkansas into Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. And then we also have this area over here, which is in the Carolinas, as well as the Delmarva Peninsula, where there is also a 2 out of 5 on the severe weather scale here indicated in this yellow risk or a slight risk. So if you live in any of those areas, I highly recommend monitoring the weather tomorrow. It's not going to be anything that'll blow your socks off for the most part, but I do highly recommend monitoring it within your respective areas. There is a 15% chance for damaging winds over 58 miles per hour within that yellow area there. That is a 15% chance for some severe weather to occur. And then the brown is, of course, the 5% chance for severe weather too. So I really would watch out for that. There is also a 2% chance for tornadoes right within this 15% as well, so I highly recommend staying alert for that. If there is a tornado warning, get underground or get into your lowest innermost part of your building, particularly a bathroom or a closet with no windows so you can put as many walls between yourself and the tornadic rotation as possible. Let's take a look at the simulated reflectivity from the NAM 3 kilometer. If you want to look at the time, it's always at the top right-hand corner there, and so if you want to follow along, feel free to do so. But at 12 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time here at noon, we got a couple scattered showers and thunderstorms that are moving about, specifically around Cleveland, the Delmarva Peninsula. You even have some action here across portions of Tallahassee. Just kind of minimal at the moment, but then this is when things start to really ramp up here in a bit. As this continues to move on through to the latter stages of the afternoon and even the evening, this line here from Cleveland really elongates, and that's the reason why there's that marginal risk up there. Wouldn't be surprised if they actually increase that to a slight risk due to the fact of how widespread the damaging winds could be. You also have that line over there across the portions of Norfolk down into Virginia Beach and even further along into central portions of North Carolina, even into the northern portions of South Carolina where Charlotte resides, right along that border. You could potentially see some severe weather from that as well. And as this continues to progress further into the evening, you can see how that line across the Outer Banks really starts to kind of amplify. But the good news is it kind of runs out of real estate when it really starts to do so. So that is the good news. But then you can also see the scattered showers and thunderstorms that begin to form across the risk in Dixie Alley, where at around 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, 7 p.m. Central Daylight Time, that's where you guys can really start to get your showers and thunderstorms that could become severe. In other words, as this continues to move into the evening stages, that's when you guys will really get your big time severe weather. And then as it gets towards midnight, it will either be off the coast or it will diminish to the point where it will no longer be severe anymore. If we take a look at our high temperatures across the United States, most of the areas in red is from 70s to 80s. Anywhere in the tan is from 80s to 90s, and anywhere in the whites, even into the whites to blacks, that's about triple digits in that general vicinity. So you can see the Northeast into the Great Lakes, they get pretty comfortable temperatures for the most part. 70s to 80s across the board there. Mainly 70s though. I'd say mid 70s for the most part. Of course, once you get closer towards the brown and tan especially here into the Central Plains and even the Rockies. That's where you guys can get some 80s across the board there, 90s across the board here in the southern portions of the United States. And then if you take a look across here in California, you got multiple areas here of triple digits. And even off into the northwest, you get some splotchy stuff of 80s, 90s, 100. It's more or less kind of like a coin flip up there. So I'd assume that if you're in the higher elevations, you get colder. Lower elevations, obviously, you get a lot warmer. So I'd highly recommend that if you are in the 90s and above, you drink a lot of water. You do not want to get a heat stroke out there, because there could be some instances where that can lead to one thing and another, and always going to want to be prepared for these instances. Day 3 outlook, nothing too much to report here. A general thunderstorm risk across the board. That's what this light green is. It's not anything severe, but it doesn't mean that there won't be anything severe either. It's just kind of a lot of people say it's a 0% chance for severe, but there could be a chance. There could be a chance for some severe weather in some of these areas. So if you live within any of this light green, just know that you might get some thunderstorms, might even be severe, but as of right now, not anything too significant. High temperatures across the board here as well. Very much so a lot warmer in some spots, even a lot hotter here across portions of, we'll just say the desert and the southwestern portions of the United States. Even just the western portion of the United States really gets a lot warmer. But then if you see across the northern plains into the central plains and the southern plains, it gets a lot cooler there. Even the deep south into the south and east, it's not 100 anymore. It's down to low 90s, mid 80s. That's kind of a nice, comfortable temperature there for most people who live over into that general vicinity. And even off to the northeast, you can see there is a lot of cooler temperatures. Still the same for the most part here in the Great Lakes, even into the northeast with 80s and 70s. So nothing really too serious to report on that. All right, here's the next part, part 2, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video. This is your tropical update. And with the National Hurricane Center, they do issue these nice little graphics that go about from now to 5 days out to determine as to whether or not there's any sort of potential for some tropical weather. And as of right now here in the Atlantic, there's nothing. There is absolutely nothing. It's kind of calm, kind of quiet, but sooner or later, most likely we'll see a revamp and some activity. And as soon as that happens, it'll be really interesting to see as to where that leads, particularly as to whether there will be impacts or not, as well as how severe these tropical systems will be. But I'll tell you one thing that's not having the same instance as the Atlantic. It's the opposite, the Pacific. It's getting all sorts of activity across the board here. We got Invest 91E with the 60% chance of formation over the next 2 days, 70% over the next 5. You have Tropical Depression 9E over here, and then you also have Tropical Storm Hilda, which in my opinion is probably going to be a hurricane. If not, it's already a hurricane right now. You'll see here in a bit as to what all we have with that, but it's just, that thing has been churning about, and I would not be surprised if it's no longer a tropical storm and is now a hurricane. So just all sorts of activity here across the Pacific to show for you all. And then we'll take a look at a bit closer to Hawaii, the Central Pacific here, where you can see Tropical Depression 9E starting to veer its sights more towards the west. Whether that will impact Hawaii, whether that goes south of that, whether it will go north of that, we'll see here within the next couple of minutes. Tropical update here for Invest 91E, the infrared satellites. A lot of meh. There's not really a whole lot of organization to this thing as of right now. You can see the clouds moving in all sorts of different directions. I'll just keep playing the loop here, but you can see the top right here, you got these clouds moving down due south. That's because there's a lot of wind shear over there that is coming off of Mexico. You also have these lower level clouds that are moving just to the north and west. There's a lot of activity over there too, and so a lot of this this congestion of convection, that is a phrase right there. I might use that more often, but congestion of convection is kind of just congealing itself a bit more, and if you can get more of that to happen, a lot more of that convection to really ignite, and you might even get convergence within that, that could potentially form into a tropical system. But we'll have to see as this continues to move on through. Some of the models say it will, some of the models say it won't. We'll see as this continues to progress. Water vapor imagery, usually you would find that use this for dry air and stuff like that. There really isn't that case. I mean, the thing that you can see the most is the wind shear coming off of Mexico. You can see how most of these thunderstorms are moving from the top of your screen to the bottom. That is your north to south component, so your northerly shear, if you will, from these storms. From these storms off here from the jet stream up there. And so we're really going to have to watch out for how this really impacts the development of this system. But as of right now, from a widespread scale, there isn't really a whole lot of dry air. And if this thing could really start to congeal, specifically right around here, if you watch that area, that's kind of right in the middle of where all the thunderstorms are actually at. And so I could potentially see something that could form right there. It's not anything too organized. As a matter of fact, if we go here to the satellite surface winds from the ASCAT satellite, you can see it's not organized whatsoever. What we're looking at right now is a bunch of wind barbs. And how wind barbs actually show up is they have this kind of line, and then they have these little flags off to the side. So they see the flag off here. Maybe there's another flag or whatever. But each little tick mark, whether it's a semi-tick mark or it's an actual flag tick mark, this right here means 5 knots. This right here means 10 knots. And whichever direction the flag is kind of opposite to, so you can see the flag here is on the left side, but the little pole at the beginning is on the right side. That means the wind is moving from left to right. And so we have a lot of that westerly shear here in some of these instances here at the bottom. This is moving from left to right. This up top is moving from right to left. We have that counterclockwise spin that we typically look for tropical cyclones and tornadoes. And so in this instance, I should say, we do indeed have that. Now, the thing of it is here with this system is that in order for us to determine as to whether or not this is organized enough, is you would need a perfectly circular circle to where all these little flags would be kind of moving in that same direction. And unfortunately, we do not have that. If I outline this little oval here, that's kind of what we got here as a center of low pressure. It's not exactly perfectly circular by any stretch of the imagination. And even if we go to the color code at the bottom where this light blue is 5 knots, this orange is 60, we got a lot of light shear over here. But otherwise, if you follow the blue flags here, and I just outline that, you can see it forms this big oval, and that's not anywhere near organized enough to say that this thing is a defined tropical system by any stretch of the imagination. But one thing that I do want to pay attention to is the thunderstorms off to the northern side. If that could wrap into some of this center area of low pressure, or if there's other thunderstorms that could form, then you could potentially get your activity and your organization. Now we're going to take a look at the microwave imagery. This is basically another version of infrared satellite. I didn't explain it well enough for why we use infrared satellite. It's basically because the higher the thunderstorms actually are, the colder it typically gets into the atmosphere. And so the thing of it is, as high as you typically travel with how cold it is, those cloud tops can actually shoot off that temperature, and satellites can pick that up relatively easy. Now, in this instance, how they are determining the temperature here is in Kelvin. So it's not Fahrenheit, it's not Celsius. There is another temperature gradient that is used in Kelvin. And so the thing of it is the colder, the more red it is, the colder it is. When you start to get to the blues, I should say, the blues across the board, that's typically really warm. And so if you, as I said, take into account that the higher you typically are, the colder it is, the stronger the thunderstorms, the higher they typically are, you can see that you have some of these instances of red that indicate some strong thunderstorm activity. And that's what I was talking about off to the north. You do have some strong thunderstorm activity. If you can get that to the center area of low pressure, you can start talking about this thing to become a lot more organized. All right, the spaghetti models here. This is really interesting to look at because with each model, they tend to have a bunch of different party members, if you will. And these party members have their own little opinions as to what they think something will do. And in this case, they're looking at Invest 91E. And so that's the reason why you have a bunch of these little lines, these little squiggly lines, is because they're like each different little opinion as they go about. And so most of the models think that this will end up going to the north and west for the most part, but then after that, you do have a couple that stray away off to the west, just a due west component. You also have a lot that still think it'll continue to maintain that trajectory, but honestly, if I had to guess, I think this thing will gradually start to veer off to the west. It'll still move to the north and west, but I think it'll start to move off to the west once it gets relatively far north, because there's another tropical system, as you guys saw with Hilda, off to the south and west of that, and it'll kind of create this little Fujiwara effect to where it'll kind of spin closer towards each other. And because low pressures tend to like each other, and they tend to kind of want to be with each other all the time, kind of like a little brother who adores an older brother, it's exactly what we have here. So it's one of those things to where it's still a little bit far out, but most of the models do think that this thing will continue to move off to the north and west, or at least according to the GFS. This is the multi-spaghetti model guidance here. And the interesting thing about this is that this is not just the one model from the GFS. So the GFS has a bunch of different little party members. It's kind of like a little group that they have, you know, like a council of people, and they're just kind of talking to each other amongst what they think is going to happen. Well, in this case, it's the same thing, except it's not one group. It's a bunch of different groups that are kind of giving their own opinion. So this is exactly what we have here. It's actually taken the same idea that I have, to where this thing will continue to move to the north and west, but then eventually it'll start to curl off a bit more to the west. And that's more or less because of that tropical system that will be off to the south and west of that. Now, if we take a look at the model intensity guidance here, we can see that this thing at the moment isn't really all too strong, but it's forecasted to at least become high-end tropical depression to even a tropical storm. You even have one model that thinks it's going to become a hurricane, but I think it'll run out of real estate before it does that, even kind of fighting for dominance with Hilda as that continues to move on through. But for the most part, I'd say the floor in this instance would be a tropical storm, and that will be most likely a factor for that. Now, here is Tropical Depression 9E. This is one thing that actually has been named, or at least not officially named as, like, you know, something like Elsa or Hilda or whatever. This is more or less kind of one of those tropical depressions that are meandering around. And so as of the 11 a.m. Hawaii Standard Time, or Hawaiian Standard Time outlook, it was moving west at 5 miles per hour. It had a minimal pressure of 1,008 millibars, had maximum sustained winds of 30 miles per hour. Now, according to the National Hurricane Center, they do think that this will become a tropical storm by Monday morning. They think that this will become a decent little tropical storm as it continues to move on through, but this thing is just running out of real estate quickly, and I think this will kind of be on the border of a depression and or storm. This, who knows, this probably will most likely not even become a tropical storm by the way it's looking right now. And as a matter of fact, if we go to this satellite imagery here, it kind of shows exactly what I'm talking about. You have a one little thunderstorm that's starting to kind of fire off right here. Other than that, if you tell me to try and find where the tropical system is, I'd probably have to put on another pair of glasses, and that should tell you something, because I already have a pair of glasses on. So the thing of it is this thing does not look appealing whatsoever. It's lost a lot of its thunderstorm activity, and the main reason is because it's, as I said, running out of real estate. If we go over to the water vapor imagery here, this is the reason why we look for dry air. This entire dark space up here, this black, all this blackness up here, I'll outline it here in red. All this blackness, that's dry air. All that is dry air. And tropical systems do not like dry air. So if dry air starts to seep into the system, thunderstorm activity tends to deplete more and more, and that's when you start to become a bit more of a withering tropical system if you were a tropical system to begin with, rather than a regular tropical system. Compare that to Hilda over here on the side. You can see it's got all sorts of gray, even white around it. This thing is a healthy tropical system. We'll get to that in a bit more in a second. But the point being is, this thing right now does not look good. The one thing I can say, though, is according to the satellite imagery, it does have some pretty interesting components to this. It has some 30-knot wind, surface winds here, which would translate to 35 miles per hour. So if it really were that strong, it possibly could be a 35 mile per hour storm instead of a 30 mile per hour storm. But as of right now, it's kind of just, you know, losing its interest a little bit. And notice how this actually has a lot more thunderstorms around it. This was actually taken before I took the satellite imagery, and so I'm guessing it's actually a bit weaker than it is now. But it could have potentially been a high-end tropical depression, maybe even a tropical storm in the previous 24 hours. But even if we take a look at the microwave imagery, there's a couple thunderstorms that are relatively interesting, high cloud tops across the board, but nothing too organized. Nothing organized by any stretch of the imagination, as I should say. I mean, you got these bands that are trying to swirl into the center area of low pressure, but it's not looking good whatsoever. One thing I can say, though, is that this thing is still trying. This is not the spaghetti model that I want to use for this, because this is actually Hilda. That's the boat one. That's the wrong one. Well, we'll just have to show you that eventually it's getting there. Eventually it's getting to Hawaii, but if I remember the models correctly, it looks like it's heading to the south of Hawaii, so not exactly that big of an issue. The one thing that I can show you, though, the one thing that I got right out of this entire presentation, is this is the intensity guidance for Tropical Depression 9E, and a lot of these models are saying exactly what I think it's going to do. The ceiling and floor is right around here. High-end tropical depression, low-end tropical storm. And I think it's going to stay around that. I think these other models over here that are thinking about a Cat 1 or even a Cat 2, they need to go get checked. They need to go see a doctor, and they need to figure out what's wrong with them. But other than that, I think that it's just going to stay relatively weak, especially as it gets closer and closer to Hawaii. Now, I kind of spoiled a little bit as to what was happening with Hilda, but oh well. Oh well. Here is Tropical Storm Hilda, which probably is Hurricane Hilda by now. Maximum sustained winds of 70 miles per hour, minimal pressure of 994 millibars, moving west-northwest at 14 miles per hour. This thing is, as of right now, a monster. I mean, look at satellite imagery. I know a lot of this red's kind of just, you know, diminished a bit. I paused the image here just to show you what it was before, and I know it kind of diminished a bit, but trust me. Look at it, freaking went ahead. There we go. We got it now. So you see this little shower right here? See this? This is what's going to make this go a little bit more explosive, if you will. This thunderstorm activity, if you can get more of that on the southern end, it'll start to wrap it around all the way around the center, and that's when you start to get your intensifying hurricane, if you will. So I think it's a hurricane as of right now. It's still, according to them, a tropical storm, but I mean, if we just continue to look at this thing, it's got rapid motion, it's got a well-defined low-pressure system, a good center for the most part. It's not like it has an eye by any stretch of the imagination, according to this, but we'll talk about that a little bit later with another image that we have. One thing that I can say for certain, as I said with the water vapor imagery, it has got a lot of moisture. It's well far away from the dry air, so nothing really too much to report about that. Here is the satellite surface winds, and my goodness, this thing is crazy. I mean, we got well-defined low pressure center for the most part. Now, the thing about the ASCAT satellite surface winds is that it doesn't really get the actual eye wall. It's kind of not large or not well-defined enough to get that. But you can see this really nice, appealing looking swirl to this, and you even have some instances where you have some wind barbs going 250 knots, which would translate to about 60 miles per hour. I saw one earlier, or at least I thought I saw one earlier that got up to 55 and 60 knots. So that's why I'm saying it's more than likely about a hurricane right now. And the thing of it is with the microwave imagery, it does have that well-defined center. You can see there's a little bit of an eye showing, which is, as I said, center of low pressure right there. Big key factor as to the intensification of this thing as it continues to move on through. Very strong, deep convection across the board. You can see a lot of this red that's starting to surround that. You even have some convection on the northern side of the storm, which you typically don't see that a whole lot. So that could be contributing to more or less a strengthening factor with this. And so it's definitely something we're going to have to monitor as this continues to move off towards the general direction of Hawaii. And speaking of which, we'll go and check the spaghetti models here. And the thing that I want to make a note of here is you see all these spaghetti models and you see how they eventually head off towards Hawaii. But the thing I want to point out the most is this little thing right here on the right hand side. And most of you may not be able to see it. But what I want to talk about here is line number 1, which I will try and make very small here. So side number 1, which is right here. So whatever is on the left side, that's number 1. Number 2 is right here. And number 3 is on the right side. So what this basically tells us is this is left side is what ensemble member it is. That's the what number run it is. So number 0 is right there, which for whatever reason they label that as 0. Number 1, 2, 3, all the way down to 30. They also have the high resolution, and then they have the mean. So that's obviously really useful because that takes an average. You have the middle one, which is the peak strength of that run of this tropical system. And so some of which say 48 hours, 36 hours, 72 hours, some even 12 hours, but for the most part, that just tells you when it was at maximum of what its strength was. And then you have the right side, which is the minimum low pressure of this tropical system. So it's really useful to look at that as this continues to move on through. Most of these models think that it will be at least below 1,000 millibars. I mean, we already know it's below 1,000 millibars because the National Hurricane Center said so, but most of these models do think that that will continue to progress. The high resolution model actually thinks that this will get down to a 977 millibar system, which is about a category 2 hurricane if that actually comes into fruition, which would happen within the next 2 days. 48 hours is when it said it will be at its maximum peak. The mean actually says that within 48 hours as well, 2 days. Most of the models think it will be about 993 millibar storm. So the point being is that this thing, as it continues to move on through, a lot of this is saying that it will continue to at least be a high-end tropical storm. But I actually think, as I said, it'll be a hurricane, and as this continues to head on through, we'll start to see these numbers start to increase a little bit. And the other thing with this is that if we go on to the Euro model, there's a couple model members that actually agree with that high resolution from the GFS, but a lot of this thinks that it's the same thing with the mean, the average overall. They do think that it will be a high-end tropical storm. Obviously, the National Hurricane Center thinks otherwise, as well as I. So that's one thing to make a note of. But the one thing that I do want to mention that I kind of put aside until now is, will this impact Hawaii? And if I had to give you a straight answer, it probably could give you some sort of impacts. So I would watch out for it. It's still a ways away, a good week and a half or week and a half until this thing actually does knock on your front door. So I would continue to monitor it. Whether or not this thing is a hurricane as it continues to head to Hawaii probably is more unlikely, especially as it heads into more of an unfavorable environment. But that's just one other thing to consider, especially with the amount of activity that you could potentially see compared to what you've had over the past couple of months, which has not been a whole lot. I mean, you had a couple showers and thunderstorms for the most part, but to get an actual tropical system, haven't had that yet this year. So that's one thing. And then the multi-spaghetti models, that's another thing too, is that they still think that it will head off to the north and west, eventually off into the general vicinity of Hawaii. Now, most of the multi-spaghetti models actually do agree with me that this thing will become a Category 1 hurricane. As a matter of fact, there's even one that thinks it'll become a Category 2, similar to the high resolution of the GFS. So that's one thing to consider as this continues to move about. But then afterwards, huge decline. I mean, my goodness, this thing just completely falls off a cliff, and it's just no looking back for this, I guess. So really something to ponder as well, that the strength of it might not be as strong as it once could be. Now, if we take a look at the simulated reflectivity here, you can't see a whole lot. I'm not going to lie. You can see Hilda, you can see 9E, and then you can see a little bit of the invest right here. So to help you out a little bit, I put up the pressure anomaly here. Actually, it's kind of more or less the it's a bit of the precipitation and pressure anomaly here for these tropical systems. And so you can obviously see here's Hilda, 9E, and then here is the invest as this continues to move about. You can also see the sea surface temperatures here, and it's in very warm waters. Tropical systems love warm, moist environments in any stretch of the imagination. So if it can stay in that, it should be able to continue to maintain. It also is in a little bit of shear. You can see that that northerly shear that I was talking about that was impacting 91 invest 91E earlier, but this thing will most likely head out of that and will continue to move about to the west, even northwest, as I mentioned, and kind of do a bit of the tango with Hilda as this continues to move on through. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but continuing with the simulated radar, you can see how here is Hilda, as I mentioned, and as this continues to move on through into the mid part of next week, you can see there's 9E off to the left-hand side, and somehow it starts to actually try again. And as that continues to move on through, you can see what I was talking about earlier. Here is Hilda, here is 9E, and they will kind of just do a little bit of a spinning motion. And according to this model, actually, Invest 91E actually kind of gets enveloped in Hilda. So maybe a short-lived tropical system of some sort before this actually kind of diminishes a bit. But the one thing with Hilda, if I remember correctly, this is indeed Hilda. The one thing about this is that Hilda starts to move into unfavorable waters here. A lot of these greens, even these yellows, not warm waters at all. Usually you want them in the orange, even the reds, browns is very favorable. I mean, look at the Atlantic. They're kind of having a whale of a time over there. But these greens, yellows, not favorable whatsoever. And so that's the reason why you see Hilda gone for the most part as that continues to move about. If we also take a look at the wind shear, for the most part, it's kind of gone as well. I mean, you still have Hilda up here. You have 9E over here. And so it's still trying. What Hilda might actually do is if that does die, most of the moisture might get caught up by 9E and it might be able to sustain it a little bit longer, which that could be a possibility. But as that continues to move off to the west, it may not be as it gets to more unfavorable conditions like that dry air that I mentioned. Continuing with the simulated radar, you can see how this kind of does the Fujiwara effect, does the tango a bit more, as Hilda tries to kind of spill into 9E as to what probably will be the new name storm from the Pacific. And then as this continues to go closer to Hawaii, it will start to dissipate and create some just general thunderstorms across the board. Now, before we get to the Atlantic, I should say, I want to mention this right here as well. This is a tropical system that the GFS has been looking at for quite a while. And according to the GFS, I haven't shown you like a loop or anything as to where it potentially will go. It will most likely head off to the north and west as well, and that could bring some moisture up to areas here in the southwest. More monsoon conditions could possibly help out with some of the drought issues over there, even though there's been a lot of flash flooding, and the same picture could be coming up soon, most likely by the end of probably right around the 14th, something like that, 10th to 14th. That's around the time frame in which this will come about into your general vicinity. All right, let's talk about the Atlantic. And I mentioned earlier, there's not really much going on. And I'm giving you the simulated radar from July 31st until August 16th. And this even says that not much is going to happen. I think that it's kind of a bit far out to say officially, but I do think that we could see a resurgence in tropical activity, specifically with a couple of tropical waves that are going to be coming off of Africa. So let's go quickly over here to this nice little product called the Velocity Potential Forecast. And this basically tells you greatest potential for velocity, rising motion in the atmosphere that creates low pressure systems, and boom, you got your tropical system. That's just the short and sweet version of this. So we got on the left hand side, we've got the CFS, which is an okay model, and then we got the EWP over on the right side, both of which are kind of on the same track for the most part. They do think that something is going to happen, but by looking at this, you probably don't know what's going on. And so if I saw this for the first time too, I probably wouldn't either. And in this instance, you know, I wouldn't blame you. What we're seeing here is these oranges right within this area and right within here as well. This is unfavorable activity for vorticity. And seems how tropical systems need vorticity, means there's probably not going to be a whole lot of tropical activity. Sorry for blinding you all for the second time in this video. However, you do see this green right here. And this green does make an appearance, especially as this continues to get closer and closer towards the end of next week. With each little line here that's every 5 days. So this is the 0 to 5. Someone's firing off fireworks in the background. That's absolutely wonderful. 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, yada, yada, yada. So about 10 to 15 days from now, they think that there will be some sort of enhanced vorticity that will most likely occur here in the Caribbean into the Gulf of Mexico. And so that's where we could potentially see a resurgence in tropical activity. And that's where we could potentially see, or I should say, be talking more about potential impacts for the United States. So one thing that you guys did not see on the simulated radar is the precipitable water. And this helps to show how much activity there actually is coming off of Africa, whether there's tropical waves, whether there actually could potentially be a low pressure system out and about, or even a hurricane, tropical storm, how much moisture there is with it. And so typically, if there's more precipitable water, if there's more moisture, it would mean that there'd be a lot more energy for a tropical system to be able to thrive. And so one thing that we're watching here, which would be on Tuesday the 3rd, is that there is a tropical wave that's going to be coming off of Africa, and there is a lot of moisture here with this too. You can see a lot of pinks and purples right within that general vicinity. That would mean that there is a lot of moisture with that, but then it just kind of meanders about and it doesn't really do a whole lot. And so even though you still have that tropical wave, my bad, we'll continue with that a little bit later. So now I gotta wait for it to come back around. That's great. Demonetized. There we go. Here's your tropical wave now. And so as this continues to move about, according to this model, they think it'll lose a lot more energy. And so that's the reason why I have to say, as of right now, it's not really looking all too favorable for tropical weather to form and sustain, especially as this is more towards the end of next week, around the 8th. And so it's just, we're kind of waiting until this thing really starts to amplify. We even have a little bit of a low pressure system out in the middle of the Atlantic. We got a lot of moisture here in the Gulf, so maybe something could form off of convergence in there, but nothing really too serious for all of that. All right, let's talk about part 3 here, a brief overlook as to what all is happening. And for most of you who may be new and looking at this, because this is mainly a weather channel, this is Earthquake 3D, and this is a really useful tool for me to use to look at where earthquakes typically are at. And so if we look about here, we got a lot of activity across the board. I'll zoom a bit into Alaska here, because this has actually had the most activity within this general vicinity. You guys remember the 8.2 magnitude earthquake that was with the tsunami fiasco in that general vicinity? And we do have a couple earthquakes in that general vicinity that are up to the magnitude 4, the magnitude 4 vicinity. You have a couple 4.0 earthquakes around that general vicinity, a lot of magnitude 3 earthquakes over there, a lot of aftershocks from that plate shifting under the actual landmass of Alaska. So a lot of activity there. That is more or less expected. A lot more activity across the board too. Typically when you have a big earthquake like that, it has a bit of a domino effect across the rest of the world, and it kind of just relieves a little bit of stress that some other areas may be building up. So that's kind of the reason why we have a lot of activity here too across portions of Mexico and even towards the San Andreas Fault. We have a couple magnitude 5 earthquakes here, 5.5 and a 5.2 over there, which actually have some relatively low depths, more or less closer to the surface. So a couple of people might have actually felt those. A couple magnitude 3 earthquakes as well, but nothing really too big over there. You also have a couple of earthquakes over in Puerto Rico. You have a lot of activity near Chile, a couple magnitude 4s and even a 5 in Argentina as well. And you also have a couple others, some recent earthquakes across the board here in the Ring of Fire on the western portions of the Ring of Fire, with some being in upwards of 4 and 5, especially from Japan all the way down to Indonesia, as well as areas north of New Zealand. And then finally, you do have some activity across the board here in Europe and Asia, specifically near Mount Everest, as well as the Mediterranean Sea. And I should have said finally here too, but casually a couple earthquakes up here near Iceland with magnitudes of 4.8 and 4.7. Whether that'll set off that volcano up there, I have no clue. So we'll have to just continue to watch out with that, because earthquakes is not exactly my forte, but I do think that I'm probably going to start studying them a little bit more as kind of like a hobby. So we'll see. Last thing here is part 4. The updates for the YouTube channels. And I know we are getting to a long video, but I did say we have a jam-packed episode here, and so we'll try and make this short and sweet as possible. Number 1, uploads will be once every 2 days, unless there is either A, active weather approaching, to which we would upload every day, or B, active weather ongoing, to which we will upload either twice a day or have one video in the morning and one video at night. It's just one of those things where if there's not really a whole lot of activity going on, I do not want to waste your guys' time. There's not really much to change, and so if there is anything that does change, I'll be sure to make a video on it. But for the most part, I'm just going to give you guys updates, make it so that it is short, well, not exactly short and sweet, but it'll be more or less jam-packed, full of information for you all. Number 2, I will mostly be absent from August 7th to August 14th due to me heading up to Massachusetts for vacation. I will try to upload if I can, but it's highly unlikely due to the lack of necessary equipment. So just a short answer for that. My computer is trash, or at least the laptop that I have is trash, and so most likely the quality of the videos that I upload would be trash, and so not exactly the best way to get information out. So if I do make a video, we'll see. But I'm going to try and get as much information for you guys as possible so that by the time I do leave, you guys know what will most likely be happening. And 3, I will be doing a makeshift question of the day for every video called Weather Takes, or at least any takes. Something takes. I'll just basically ask you your thoughts on whatever I I think I need thoughts on in the video, and in the comment section down below, that's where you guys should probably put it. And it's just a good way to engage with my audience. I like talking with you guys. I do that a lot on Discord, but it's just a good way to talk with you guys for the most part. So I guess my weather take for the day, or the weather take for the most part for us, is, what do you think Hilda will do? You think it will become a hurricane? And if so, how high do you think it's going to be? How high in sustained wind speed? What's your minimum low pressure? What do you think is going to happen with it? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. That's going to be it for me. My name is Nate. I also go by HockeyBoy8. And I will catch you guys most likely in the next video. So please be sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and like the video if you did like it and you want to stick around. So peace out.